It was the kind of night that destroys careers. A nurse, standing alone in a trauma bay, holding the line between life and death for a man everyone else wanted to let die. To the hospital administrators, the patient was just a nameless drifter, a waste of resources. But to Sarah, he was a human being. She defied a direct order to save him and paid the ultimate price, her badge, her job, and her reputation. She was escorted out of the building in tears. But what those arrogant doctors didn't know was that the homeless man in bed 4 wasn't a drifter at all. He was one of the most powerful men in the United States military, and he was about to wake up. The rain battered the glass sliding doors of the emergency room at St. Sebastian's Medical Center in downtown Chicago. It was 2:14 a.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of graveyard shift that usually consisted of intoxicated college students and minor car accidents. But tonight, the atmosphere in the ER was sharp, brittle and cold. Sarah Jenkins adjusted her stethoscope around her neck. At 32, she was a senior trauma nurse, known for her steady hands and an inability to tolerate incompetence. She had been at St. Sebastian's for 8 years, long enough to see the hospital shift from a place of healing to a place of profits. "Trauma 1 is incoming," the radio crackled at the nurse's station. "Male, approximately 60 years old. Found unconscious in an alleyway off Wacker Drive. No ID, hypertensive, breath smells of cheap whiskey. ETA 2 minutes. Dr. Arthur Banks, the attending physician that night, didn't even look up from his tablet. He was a man who cared more about metrics and donor dinners than patient care. "Sounds like another frequent flyer," Banks muttered, scrolling through a golf catalogue. "Put him in the hallway. We need the bays clear. I heard Councilman Sterling's son might be coming in with a sprained wrist from a rowing accident." Sarah felt a familiar knot of anger tighten in her stomach. "Doctor, if he's hypertensive, he could be bleeding internally. We can't just hallway him." Banks peered over his glasses, his eyes devoid of warmth. "It's a John Doe, Sarah. Probably an overdose or liver failure. Don't waste the resources. Triaging protocol says we prioritize viable patients." The ambulance bay doors hissed open, admitting a gust of freezing wind and the frantic paramedics wheeling in a stretcher. The man on the gurney looked rough. His beard was matted with grime. His clothes were torn flannel and stained heavy canvas. He looked every bit the homeless drifter Banks assumed he was. But Sarah saw something else. As she moved to transfer him to the gurney, her hand brushed his chest. It was hard, muscular, not the wasted frame of a chronic alcoholic. She saw a faded scar running from his collarbone to his shoulder, a jagged line that looked like shrapnel damage. And then, on his left forearm, obscured by dirt and grease, she saw the faint, dark ink of a tattoo, USMC. "He's crashing," the paramedic yelled. "BP is dropping, 60/40. "Get him into Trauma Bay 2, Sarah commanded, grabbing the gurney rail. "Nurse Jenkins!" Dr. Banks barked, stepping in front of the moving stretcher. "I said the hallway. Trauma 2 is reserved for the VIP arrival. Do not make me repeat myself." The monitors shrieked a high-pitched alarm. The patient was going into V-fib. Sarah looked at the man on the table. He was dying right now. If they moved him to the hallway, without the crash cart and the monitors, he would be dead in 2 minutes. She looked at Banks, a man who had never risked anything in his life, and then down at the patient, a man whose scars told a story of 1,000 risks. "Move," Sarah said, her voice low and dangerous. "Excuse me?" Banks gasped. "I said move, doctor." Sarah shoved the heavy gurney forward, forcing Banks to step aside or be run over. She steered the patient into Trauma Bay 2 and slammed the brake. "Code blue! I need a crash cart! Start compressions!" She ripped open the man's flannel shirt. Beneath the grime, His chest was a map of old battles, bullet wounds, burn scars. This man was a warrior. "Charge to 200, Sarah yelled to the junior nurse, Beatrice, who looked terrified. "Sarah, Banks is calling security," Beatrice whispered, her hands shaking as she applied the pads. "Let him call the president for all I care," Sarah said, placing the paddles. "Clear!" The body arched off the table. The monitor flatlined. "Again! Charge to 300! Clear!" Nothing. Sarah threw the paddles down and climbed onto a step stool, interlocking her hands over the man's sternum. She began manual compressions, hard and fast. Staying alive tempo. She looked at the man's face. Beneath the beard, he had a strong jaw, a nose that had been broken twice. "Come on," she gritted out, sweat forming on her brow. "You didn't survive a war just to die in a Chicago ER because of a golfer with a god complex. Come on, security." Dr. Banks's voice boomed from the doorway. 2 burly guards appeared behind him. "Remove Nurse Jenkins from the patient. She is assaulting a corpse and disobeying a direct order." "I have a rhythm," Beatrice screamed, pointing at the monitor. A faint beep. Then another. Then a steady, albeit weak, sinus rhythm. Sarah stopped, panting, her hair plastered to her forehead. She checked the carotid pulse. It was there. Thready, but there. "He's back," Sarah whispered. She looked up at Dr. Banks. "He's alive." Banks didn't look relieved. He looked furious. His authority had been challenged in front of the entire staff. He pointed a trembling finger at the security guards. "Escort her out," Banks hissed. "She is suspended pending an immediate investigation for insubordination and misuse of hospital property." Sarah didn't fight the guards. She gently placed the oxygen mask over the John Doe's face, leaned down, and whispered, "Don't you die on me now, Marine." She stood up, stripped off her gloves, and threw them in the biohazard bin. She walked past Dr. Banks without a word, her head held high, even as her heart shattered. She had saved a life, and she knew, with a sinking dread, that it had just cost her the career she loved. The walk from the emergency room to the locker bay was usually a time for Sarah to decompress, to wash the blood and trauma of the shift from her mind. Tonight, it felt like a funeral procession. The security guards, men Sarah had shared coffee with for years, wouldn't meet her eyes. One of them, a jovial man named Frank, muttered, "Sorry, Sarah. You know we got to do what Banks says." "It's okay, Frank," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Just keep an eye on that John Doe in Bay 2, okay? Don't let them move him." "I'll try," Frank said, though they both knew his power was limited. Inside the locker room, Sarah's hands shook violently as she unbuttoned her scrubs. She had $400 in her savings account. Rent was due in 3 days. Her student loans were a crushing weight that never seemed to get lighter. This job wasn't just a passion, it was her lifeline. She pulled on her jeans and a thick wool sweater. As she packed her bag, her stethoscope, her spare shoes, a framed photo of her late mother, the door opened. It was Administrator Preston Sterling. The man was a shark in a 3-piece suit, the director of operations for the entire hospital network. He was the one who had turned St. Sebastian's from a community hospital into a corporate machine. "Ms. Jenkins," Sterling said, his voice smooth and oily. He didn't step fully into the room, as if the air of the staff locker room was beneath him. "Mr. Sterling," Sarah replied, zipping her bag. "I've just had a very distressing conversation with Dr. Banks," Sterling said, checking his Rolex. "He tells me you physically assaulted him and hijacked a trauma bay reserved for a priority patient." "The priority patient had a sprained wrist," Sarah snapped, turning to face him. "My patient was in cardiac arrest. He's a veteran. He has shrapnel scars." Sterling let out a short, dismissive laugh. He is a vagrant, Miss Jenkins, a drain on the system, and because of your theatrics, my son, who, I might add, is in considerable pain, had to wait 20 minutes for a private room. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. That was the VIP, Sterling's own son. I saved a man's life, Sarah said, her voice steel. You violated policy number 404 regarding triage allocation, Sterling recited coldly. Dr. Banks wants you fired. I am inclined to agree. But because you have been here a long time, I will offer you a choice. He paused, a cruel smile playing on his lips. You can sign a statement admitting that you acted erratically due to stress and exhaustion, agreeing to a 6-month suspension without pay and a demotion to custodial staff duties upon return. Or you can be terminated immediately for gross misconduct, stripped of your pension, and I will personally ensure you are blacklisted from every hospital in Illinois. The silence in the room was deafening. The hum of the vending machine outside seemed incredibly loud. Custodial duties? Cleaning toilets in the hospital where she had saved hundreds of lives? It was a humiliation designed to break her. Sarah looked at Sterling. She thought of the Marine in the trauma bay. She thought of the Semper Fi tattoo. He hadn't compromised when he earned those scars. She swung her bag over her shoulder. Go to hell, Sterling, she said. Sterling's face turned a deep shade of crimson. Get out. If you are on this property in 5 minutes, I will have you arrested for trespassing. Sarah walked out. She didn't look back. She marched through the sliding doors into the pouring rain, the cold water mixing with the hot tears finally spilling down her cheeks. She sat in her beat-up Honda Civic, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white, screaming in frustration until her throat was raw. Back inside the hospital, the John Doe in Trauma Bay 2 began to stir. The sedatives were wearing off faster than the doctors anticipated. His metabolism burned through them with a ferocity that was purely biological adaptation. His eyes snapped open. They were steel grey, sharp, and instantly alert. He didn't groan. He didn't flail. He assessed. Tube in throat. IV in arm. Hospital. He reached up with a hand that felt like lead and ripped the oxygen mask off. The monitors blared again. A young nurse, not Beatrice, rushed in. Sir, you need to lie down. You had a heart attack. The man tried to speak, his voice a gravelly rasp of disuse and smoke. Where is she? Who? The nurse asked, trying to restrain him. The angel, the man rasped, coughing. The one who refused to let me go. The one with the blue eyes. I don't know who you mean, sir. Please lie back. Dr. Banks is coming. The man fell back against the pillow, his strength failing him for the moment. But his mind was working. He remembered the voice. Don't you die on me now, Marine. He remembered the fight. He remembered someone standing over him, protecting him when the other voice wanted to cast him aside. General Thomas Bulldog Garrison, 4-star General of the United States Marine Corps, and the man responsible for the entire Western defense sector, closed his eyes. He wasn't a homeless man. He had been on a covert reconnaissance mission, checking on veteran support services in the city under deep cover, a practice he did once a year to see how his boys were really being treated. He had been jumped by a gang, drugged, and left for dead, and this hospital had tried to finish the job, but someone had saved him. And if his memory served him right, that person was in trouble. Dr. Banks entered the room, looking annoyed. Ah, the John Doe is awake. Good. Stabilize him and get him transferred to County General. We need this bed cleared by morning. General Garrison didn't open his eyes, but his right hand, hidden under the sheet, clenched into a fist. You have made a grave mistake, Doctor, he thought. You have no idea who just woke up. 3 days had passed since the incident. For Sarah, they were 72 hours of agonizing silence. She sat at her small kitchen table in her one-bedroom apartment, staring at her phone. She had applied to 3 urgent care clinics and a private practice in the suburbs. 2 hadn't called back. The third, a clinic in Naperville, had called her this morning. The interview had been going well until the hiring manager typed her name into his database. His face had changed. The warmth vanished. "I'm sorry, Miss Jenkins," he had said, closing the folder. "We have a strictly enforced ethics code here. We can't hire someone with a do not hire flag from the St. Sebastian network. It says here you were terminated for endangering patients and assaulting senior staff." "That's a lie," Sarah had pleaded. "I saved a patient they wanted to discard." "I'm sorry," was all he said. Sterling hadn't been bluffing. He had blacklisted her. Sarah took a sip of cold coffee. The eviction notice wasn't on the door yet, but it was coming. She picked up the local newspaper. On page 4, buried near the bottom, was a small blurb. "Local hospital celebrates new wing donation by Sterling family." Not a word about the nurse who saved a life. Her phone buzzed. Her heart leapt. Was it a job offer? It was Beatrice. "Sarah." Beatrice's voice was a whisper. She was probably calling from the supply closet. "Bea, are you okay? Did you get in trouble?" "I'm fine. I kept my head down," Beatrice said. "But Sarah, you have to know. That patient, the John Doe—" "Is he alive?" Sarah asked, gripping the phone. That was the only thing that mattered. If he lived, it was worth it. "He's alive, but it's weird. They transferred him to a charity ward in the basement yesterday. Banks wrote on his chart that he was non-compliant and abusive. But Sarah, I went down there to sneak him some extra Jell-O. And? He's not a bum," Beatrice said. "He asked for a phone, a specific kind of phone. He kept asking for secure line, and he asked for you. He asked for the commander of the ER. That's what he called you." Sarah managed a weak smile. "I'm glad he's okay. But it doesn't matter, Bea. I'm done. Nobody will hire me." "There's something else." Beatrice hesitated. 2 men in suits came in today looking for him. Not police. Like government suits. Dr. Banks told them the patient had been discharged and left against medical advice. "He lied, Sarah. The patient is still in the basement." Sarah stood up, knocking her chair over. "Banks is hiding him." "I think Banks is trying to let him die down there, so the medical error goes away." Beatrice sobbed. "His vitals are dropping again, and Banks won't authorize a cardiologist." Sarah felt the fire ignite in her chest again. The depression vanished, replaced by the same cold fury she had felt in the trauma bay. "Listen to me, Beatrice. Do not let anyone touch him. I'm coming back." "You can't. Security has your picture at the front desk." "I'm not coming alone," Sarah said, though she had no idea who she would bring. She hung up. She paced her small living room. Who could she call? The police? They would side with the hospital administration. The news? They would take days to investigate. She needed immediate action. She thought about the tattoo. USMC, Semper Fi, always faithful. Sarah grabbed her coat. She drove to the only place she could think of. The VFW, Veterans of Foreign Wars, hall on 4th Street. It was a long shot. A desperate shot. It was 11:00 a.m. The bar was dim and smelled of stale beer and floor polish. A handful of old men sat at the bar, watching a game show. Sarah burst in, breathless. The bartender, a burly man with a prosthetic arm, looked up. "Help you, miss." "I need help," Sarah said, her voice ringing out in the quiet room. "There is a Marine dying at St. Sebastian's Hospital. The doctors are hiding him. They fired me for saving his life, and now they are letting him rot in a basement. Because he's bad for business." The room went silent. The game show on the TV seemed to fade into the background. An older man at a corner table stood up. He was wearing a hat that said, "Vietnam Veteran." "What kind of Marine?" "I don't know his name," Sarah said, tears welling up. "But he's about 60. Grey hair, scar from collarbone to shoulder, and he has a tattoo on his left arm." "Describe the scar," the man said, stepping forward. "Jagged, shrapnel, old." The man looked at the bartender. Then he looked at Sarah. "Did he say anything?" He called me the commander," Sarah whispered. The man in the corner dropped his beer glass. It shattered on the floor. "Holy Mother of God," the man whispered. "Top? Is that you?" He looked at Sarah with intense eyes. "Miss, did this man have a ring? A heavy silver ring?" I didn't see a ring. They took his personal effects." "If it's who I think it is," the man said, his voice trembling, "St. Sebastian's just declared war on the United States Marine Corps." He pulled out a flip phone. He didn't dial 911. He dialed a number from memory. "Get the boys," the man said into the phone. "We found the general, and he's behind enemy lines." Sarah Jenkins stood at the main entrance of St. Sebastian's, the rain still pouring, soaking her to the bone. Next to her stood the man from the VFW, who had introduced himself simply as Gunny Miller. He was 70 years old, walked with a cane, and wore a faded green jacket that had seen better days. Behind him were 4 other men from the bar, older, slower, but with a look in their eyes that suggested they were ready to tear the hospital apart brick by brick. "This is a bad idea, Gunny," Sarah whispered, shivering. "Security will just call the police." "Let 'em call," Gunny growled. "My boys are en route. We just need to hold the line until the cavalry arrives. You said he's in the basement?" "That's what Beatrice said. The charity ward. It's where they put patients they want to forget." They walked through the sliding doors. The warmth of the lobby hit them, smelling of antiseptic and expensive coffee. The receptionist, a young woman named Chloe, who had always liked Sarah, looked up and gasped. "Sarah, you can't be here. Mr. Sterling sent a memo with your photo. Shoot on sight, practically." "I need to see the patient in the basement, Chloe," Sarah said firmly. "The John Doe." Before Chloe could answer, the elevator doors dinged open. Dr. Arthur Banks stepped out, flanked by 2 security guards and Preston Sterling himself. They looked like they were heading to a press conference, dressed in immaculate suits. Banks stopped dead when he saw Sarah. A sneer curled his lip. "I see you lack the ability to understand simple instructions, Miss Jenkins," Banks said, his voice echoing in the cavernous lobby. "Criminal trespassing. Security. Detain her until the police arrive." The 2 guards stepped forward, reaching for Sarah. Gunny Miller stepped in front of her. He didn't raise his cane. He just planted his feet. "Touch her, son, and you'll regret it." Sterling laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "And who is this? The geriatric brigade? Get these bums out of my hospital. We have donors arriving in an hour." "We are here for the Marine," Gunny said, his voice surprisingly loud. "The one you're hiding in the cellar." Banks's eyes flickered. It was a subtle reaction, a momentary twitch of panic, but Sarah saw it. He was hiding something. "There are no Marines here," Banks lied smoothly. "Only a mentally unstable indigent man who is currently being processed for transfer to a state hospice facility." "Hospice?" Sarah screamed. "He had a manageable arrhythmia. He doesn't need hospice. He needs a cardiologist. You're killing him." "You are hysterical," Sterling spat. "Guard, remove them, now." One of the guards, a young man who looked like he spent too much time at the gym, grabbed Gunny by the collar. "Come on, Grandpa. Time to go." Gunny didn't move. He grabbed the guard's wrist, applying pressure to a nerve point that made the younger man yelp and drop to his knees. "I served 3 tours in Vietnam, son," Gunny said calmly. "I've eaten snakes tougher than you." "Assault!" Sterling shrieked. "Call the police! Lock down the building!" Alarms began to blare. Red lights flashed. The lobby turned into chaos. Patients scattered. "Sarah, go!" Gunny shouted over the noise. "Find the general. We'll hold them here." Sarah didn't hesitate. While the guards were distracted by the 5 angry veterans, she sprinted toward the service stairwell. She knew the codes. She knew the layout. She slammed through the heavy fire door and took the stairs 2 at a time, descending into the bowels of the hospital. The air grew colder as she went down. The basement wasn't renovated like the upstairs. It smelled of damp concrete and mold. This was the overflow unit, a place St. Sebastian's didn't put on the brochures. She burst into the open ward. It was dimly lit, rows of curtained cubicles stretched out. Most were empty. "Beatrice," Sarah called out. Beatrice popped her head out from behind a curtain in the far corner. Her face was pale. "Sarah, they're coming to move him. The ambulance is at the back loading dock. They're taking him to a place called Sunset Ridge." Sarah knew Sunset Ridge. It was a warehouse for the dying, a place with a mortality rate that should have been illegal. She ran to the bed. The man, General Garrison, was pale, his skin clammy. He was restrained to the bed rails with soft cuffs. An IV bag of saline hung empty above him. They were starving him. "Marine," Sarah whispered, touching his cheek. "Can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open. They were glassy, but the steel was still there. He focused on her face. "The commander," he rasped. A faint smile touched his cracked lips. "You came back." "I told you I wouldn't let you die," Sarah said, tears spilling over. She began undoing the restraints. "We have to go. Now." "Too late," a voice boomed from the shadows. Sarah spun around. Dr. Banks was standing by the service elevator, accompanied by 2 orderlies who looked more like bouncers. "You really are a persistent nuisance, Sarah," Banks said, adjusting his tie. "He's leaving, and you are going to jail." "He is a United States general," Sarah screamed, placing herself between Banks and the bed. "He is a hobo named John Doe," Banks said coldly, "and dead men tell no tales. Load him up." The orderlies stepped forward. Sarah grabbed a metal IV pole, wielding it like a spear. "Stay back." "Grab her," Banks ordered. Just as the orderlies lunged, a low rumble began to vibrate through the floor. It wasn't the HVAC system. It wasn't the subway. It sounded like thunder. It grew louder, a rhythmic, heavy thrumming that shook the dust from the ceiling tiles. Thump, 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 thump. It was the sound of heavy boots, hundreds of them, running in unison. "What is that?" one of the orderlies asked, looking at the ceiling. Sarah looked at the general. He had closed his eyes, listening. "The Corps," the general whispered. "They're here." 5 minutes earlier, outside the main entrance of St. Sebastian's Medical Center, the traffic on Wacker Drive had come to a complete, grinding halt. It started with a roar of engines. A column of motorcycles, the Patriot Guard riders, swerved into the hospital drop-off lane, blocking the exits. 50 bikers, leather-clad and bearing American flags, dismounted in perfect synchronization, forming a perimeter. Then came the trucks. Heavy, dark green transport trucks with government plates hopped the curb, crushing the manicured flower beds that Preston Sterling was so proud of. They screeched to a halt, blocking the ambulance bays, the parking garage exits, and the main doors. And then, the personnel. They didn't just come from the trucks, they came from everywhere. Marines in dress blues who had been at a local gala, Marines in camouflage fatigues from the nearby reserve base, veterans in wheelchairs, veterans in suits, veterans in construction gear. The call from Gunny Miller had gone out on the Scuttlebutt network, a communication line faster than the internet and more reliable than the news. General Bulldog Garrison is down. Hostiles at St. Sebastian's, all hands on deck. Inside the lobby, Preston Sterling was screaming at a police officer who had just arrived. "Arrest those old men! They are disrupting a business!" The police officer, a young sergeant named Kowalski, looked out the glass doors. His face went white. "Mr. Sterling," Kowalski said, taking a step back, "I can't arrest them." "Why not? Do your job." "Because," Kowalski pointed a shaking finger, "that's the 2nd Battalion." The automatic doors were forced open. They didn't slide. They were simply pushed off their tracks by the sheer volume of men entering. A wave of green and blue uniforms flooded the lobby. The silence that fell over the room was terrifying. It wasn't a mob. It was a formation. 300 Marines filled the atrium in seconds, lining the walls, the stairs, the balconies. They stood at parade rest, silent, stone-faced, staring at the hospital administration. The crowd parted down the center. A man walked through. He was wearing full-service alphas, the green uniform with medals stacked to his shoulder. On his collar shone the silver eagles of a full colonel. He was Colonel James Reed, General Garrison's right hand. He walked straight up to Preston Sterling. Colonel Reed was 6'4", a tower of muscle and discipline. "I am Colonel Reed, United States Marine Corps," he said. His voice wasn't a shout, but it carried to the back of the room. "I am looking for General Thomas Garrison." Sterling, sweating profusely, tried to muster his arrogance. "Colonel, you are trespassing on private property. This is a hospital, not a battlefield. I demand you remove your men immediately." Colonel Reed looked down at Sterling as if he were a bug on a windshield. "Sir, according to my intelligence, a 4-star general of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is being held against his will in this facility. That makes this a hostile extraction zone. Now, I will ask you once." Reed leaned in, his face inches from Sterling's. "Where is my general?" Sterling stammered. I don't know who that is. We have a John Doe." "Basement!" a voice shouted from the back. It was Gunny Miller, still holding his cane, grinning like a madman. "They took him to the basement, Colonel, and the nurse is with him." Colonel Reed turned to his men. He didn't need to yell. He just signaled. "Alpha Company, secure the perimeter. Bravo Company, with me. We're going underground." 50 Marines broke formation and marched toward the elevators and stairwells. The sound of their boots on the marble floor was like a drum roll of judgment. Down in the basement, Dr. Banks heard the noise. The elevator doors pinged. He expected police. He expected security. Instead, the doors opened and revealed a wall of Marines, rifles slung, safely but visibly, their faces grim. Banks dropped the patient chart. The 2 orderlies released Sarah instantly and backed away, hands raised. Colonel Reed stepped out of the elevator, followed by a squad of medics, Navy corpsmen. "Secure the room," Reed ordered. Marines fanned out, pushing Banks and the orderlies against the wall. They didn't touch them, but the threat was implicit. Reed walked to the bed. He looked at the frail man strapped to the gurney. He saw the bruises, the dirt, the neglect. A muscle in the colonel's jaw ticked. He snapped to attention and saluted slowly, holding it until his hand trembled. "General Garrison, sir. Colonel Reed reporting for duty. We are here to bring you home." General Garrison looked up. He was weak, but he raised his hand and returned a shaky salute. "Took you long enough, Jimmy," Garrison rasped. "Traffic, sir," Reed replied, deadpan. He turned to the corpsman. "Get him on a monitor. Prep for transport to Walter Reed immediately. I want a chopper on the roof in 5 minutes." "Yes, Colonel." Colonel Reed then turned his attention to Sarah. She was standing by the bed, still holding the IV pole, her hair a mess, her eyes wide with shock. Reed looked at the IV pole. He looked at the way she was shielding the general's body with her own. "You must be the commander," Reed said softly. Sarah blinked. I'm Sarah. I'm a nurse." "General Garrison has been conscious off and on," Reed said. "He managed to get a message out through the VFW network. He said a commander of the ER saved his life when the enemy tried to finish him." Reed extended his hand. "Thank you, ma'am. The Corps is in your debt." Sarah took his hand. It was warm and strong. I just did my job. They fired me for it." Reed's expression darkened. He turned slowly to look at Dr. Banks, who was currently trying to make himself invisible against the concrete wall. "Is that so?" Reed asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "They fired you?" "Yes," Sarah said, "and they blacklisted me." "Bring him here," Reed ordered. 2 Marines grabbed Dr. Banks by the arms and dragged him to the center of the room. Banks was shaking so hard his teeth chattered. "Colonel, please," Banks whimpered. "This is a misunderstanding. It was a triage error. I followed protocol." General Garrison pushed himself up on one elbow. The effort cost him, but his voice cut through the air like a knife. "You," Garrison wheezed, pointing a trembling finger at Banks. "You looked me in the eye, and you ordered me to the hallway to die, because I didn't have insurance." "Sir, I didn't know," Banks pleaded. "It shouldn't matter who I was," Garrison said. "That woman knew. She knew I was a human being." Garrison looked at Colonel Reed. "Colonel, have this man arrested for attempted murder and falsifying federal records, and get Sterling down here." "With pleasure, sir." The scene outside St. Sebastian's Hospital had turned into a national spectacle. News helicopters hovered overhead. CNN and Fox News were broadcasting live from the street, showing the line of military vehicles and the crowd of cheering onlookers. The narrative had shifted instantly. War hero saved by nurse. Hospital attempted cover-up. Inside the lobby, the atmosphere was more like a courtroom. Preston Sterling was currently sitting on a plastic chair in the center of the atrium. He wasn't in handcuffs yet, but he was surrounded by 4 military police officers who were waiting for the FBI to arrive. The elevator doors opened. A stretcher emerged, pushed by Navy corpsmen. On it lay General Garrison. He was on oxygen, wrapped in warm blankets, but he was awake. Walking right next to the stretcher, flanked by Marines, was Sarah Jenkins. As they entered the lobby, a hush fell over the room. The hundreds of Marines standing guard snapped to attention. Clack! The sound of hundreds of heels coming together echoed like a gunshot. "Present! Arms!" Colonel Reed bellowed. 300 Marines plus the veterans from the VFW saluted. They weren't saluting the general. They were looking at Sarah. Sarah felt her face burn. She had spent the last 3 days feeling like a failure, like a criminal. Now she was walking through a corridor of honor. The procession stopped in front of Sterling. Sterling stood up, trying to salvage his dignity. "General Garrison, I assure you, my legal team will be filing suits for this invasion. This is a misunderstanding." General Garrison pulled the oxygen mask down. His color was better. The fluids were working. "Mr. Sterling," Garrison said, "I've already spoken to the Secretary of Defense. St. Sebastian's just lost its federal funding. Every penny. Medicare, Medicaid, research grants. Gone." Sterling's face turned gray. That was 80% of their revenue. The hospital would be bankrupt in a month. "You can't do that," Sterling gasped. "I just did," Garrison said, "and I'm launching a full investigation into your billing practices. I have a feeling we're going to find a lot of John Does who died because they weren't profitable." Garrison looked at Sarah. "Sarah," he said gently, I believe you are currently unemployed." "Yes," Sarah said quietly. "Well, the United States Navy operates a hospital in Bethesda. It's the best in the world. We have an opening for a head nurse in the trauma unit. It comes with a commission, a lieutenant's rank, and a pension that Mr. Sterling here could only dream of." Sarah's eyes widened. "General, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Garrison said. "We need people who disobey orders when the orders are wrong." Sarah looked at Sterling, who was now weeping into his hands. She looked at Dr. Banks, who was being led out in handcuffs by the Chicago PD, who had finally decided which side to be on. She looked at the Marines standing tall. "Yes," Sarah said, smiling for the first time in days. "I'd be honored." "Good," Garrison said. He patted her hand. "Now let's get out of here. This place smells like greed." As they wheeled the general out to the waiting helicopter, the Marines broke formation to cheer. It was a roar of approval that shook the glass windows. Sarah walked out into the cool Chicago air. The rain had stopped. The sun was breaking through the clouds. She saw Beatrice standing by the door, crying happy tears. Sarah ran over and hugged her. "I'm taking you with me," Sarah whispered. "Pack your bags, Bea." The seasons had turned 4 times since the convoy of heavy transport trucks had paralyzed downtown Chicago. But for Sarah Jenkins, the memory of the rain against the glass doors of St. Sebastian's was as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. It was a crisp, bright Tuesday morning in Bethesda, Maryland. Sarah stood on the 4th-floor balcony of the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, a steaming cup of coffee in her hands. The view here was different. Instead of the grey, claustrophobic alleyways of the city, she looked out over manicured lawns, American flags snapping in the wind, and men and women in uniform moving with purpose. She adjusted the lapel of her white coat. It was no longer the generic, frayed scrubs of an overworked ER nurse. Embroidered on the chest, in navy blue thread, were the words, "Sarah Jenkins, RN, Director of Patient Advocacy, Trauma Division." "Director Jenkins?" Sarah turned. A young intern, fresh out of med school and looking terrified, stood in the doorway holding a clipboard. "Yes, Dr. Evans. We have a transfer coming in from overseas, multi-trauma. The attending physician wants to bypass the preliminary psychological screening to get him into surgery faster. But the protocol says we treat the mind and the body," Sarah interrupted, gently but firmly. "If he's conscious, he gets the screening. Trauma isn't just bleeding, doctor. It's what they carry in their heads. Tell the attending that if he has a problem with the delay, he can come speak to me." The intern swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am." Sarah watched him leave and smiled. In her old life, challenging a doctor would have meant a write-up or termination. Here, it was her job description. General Garrison had made sure of that. When he had arranged for her commission as a civilian liaison, he had given her a specific mandate. Be the shield. The door opened again, and this time it wasn't an intern. It was Beatrice. The transformation in Beatrice was nothing short of miraculous. Gone was the timid woman who hid in supply closets. Working in a military environment had given her a backbone of steel. She was now the senior charge nurse for the rehab wing, and she walked with a stride that demanded respect. "You're going to be late," Beatrice said, checking her watch. "And you know how the Marines feel about tardiness. Early is on time is late, and late is unacceptable." "I'm ready," Sarah said, putting her coffee down. I needed a moment." "Nervous?" "A little," Sarah admitted. "It's a big day." "It is," Beatrice agreed. She pulled a tablet out of her bag. "But before we go, you need to see this. It just broke on the Chicago wire." Sarah took the tablet. The headline of the Chicago Tribune was bold and black. "Justice served. Former hospital tycoon sentenced to 20 years." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she read the article. The investigation launched by General Garrison had been ruthless and thorough. It hadn't just uncovered the incident with the general, it had exposed a decade-long rot at the core of St. Sebastian's. Preston Sterling had been found guilty of 24 counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to endanger public health. The article described him weeping in the courtroom as the judge, a woman whose own father had been a veteran, delivered the maximum sentence. And Dr. Arthur Banks? His fate was even grimmer. Stripped of his medical license permanently, he was facing separate charges for involuntary manslaughter regarding 3 indigent patients who had died under his care due to lack of treatment. He was currently being held without bail. "They can't hurt anyone else," Sarah whispered, handing the tablet back. "It's really over." "The hospital has a new name now," Beatrice said softly. "The Garrison Jenkins Community Medical Center. The university that bought it out wanted to make a statement." Sarah laughed, a sound of pure disbelief. "He put my name on a building?" "He put your name on the door where you saved his life," Beatrice corrected. "Now come on. The general is waiting." The ceremony was being held at the National Museum of the Marine Corps, a soaring architectural marvel just outside the base. The main atrium was packed. It seemed like every high-ranking official in the Department of Defense was there. Senators, admirals, and hundreds of Marines in their dress blues filled the seats, a sea of midnight blue and gold. Sarah and Beatrice were ushered to the front row, seated next to Colonel Reed, who gave Sarah a solemn nod. "Ma'am," Reed said, "you look sharp." "Thank you, Colonel," Sarah replied. "Is he ready?" "He's been ready for 40 years. Reed grinned. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd as the color guard marched in, the flags rhythmic and precise. Then General Thomas "Bulldog" Garrison took the stage. He looked nothing like the dying man in the basement. He was vibrant, strong, and radiating authority. This was his retirement ceremony, the culmination of a legendary career. He spoke for 20 minutes about strategy, about the changing nature of warfare, and about the young men and women serving overseas. But then his tone changed. He stepped away from the prepared speech on the teleprompter. He took off his reading glasses and looked directly at the audience. "We talk a lot about heroes in this room," Garrison's voice boomed, amplified by the acoustics of the atrium. "We give medals for taking hills, for neutralizing targets, for enduring captivity, and those are well earned." He paused, his eyes scanning the front row until they locked on to Sarah. But the hardest battles aren't always fought with a rifle. Sometimes the enemy isn't a soldier in a uniform. Sometimes the enemy is indifference. Sometimes the enemy is a system that values a dollar bill more than a human heartbeat. The room was deadly silent. "1 year ago, I was a casualty of that enemy," Garrison continued, his voice thickening with emotion. "I was lying on a gurney, alone, classified as garbage. I was ordered to be discarded. And I would be dead today, buried in a pauper's grave as a John Doe, if not for the courage of one woman." He pointed a gloved hand at her. "Sarah Jenkins, front and center." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She stood up, her legs feeling heavy. The walk to the stage felt like miles. As she ascended the stairs, she could feel the eyes of thousands on her. She stopped in front of the general. He didn't offer a handshake. He opened his arms and pulled her into a hug that broke all military protocol. It was the embrace of a father reuniting with a lost child. "Thank you," he whispered into her ear. so low only she could hear, for giving me time to see my grandkids grow up. He pulled back and turned to the podium. An aide handed him a velvet box. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, at the risk of her own livelihood, Garrison announced, his voice regaining its command. For refusing to compromise her oath as a healer in the face of intimidation and superior orders, the President of the United States and the Secretary of the Navy take pleasure in presenting the Navy Distinguished Public Service Award to Sarah Jenkins. He opened the box. The gold medal gleamed under the stage lights. As he pinned it to her lapel, Sarah looked out at the crowd. She saw Gunny Miller in the third row, wearing his old VFW hat, weeping openly. She saw the young Marines she had treated in the trauma wing over the last few months, men and women who looked at her not just as a nurse, but as a guardian. And then the noise started. It wasn't polite golf claps. It began with Colonel Reed standing up and letting out a sharp, piercing whistle. Then the entire front row stood. Then the balcony. Within seconds, 2,000 people were on their feet. The roar was deafening, a thunderous ovation of stomping boots and cheering voices. It was a sound of validation, washing away every moment of doubt, every tear she had shed in that parking lot in Chicago. Sarah fought back tears, bringing a hand to her mouth. She wasn't just the nurse who got fired anymore. She was a part of this family. The reception afterwards was a blur of handshakes and flashbulbs, but as the crowd began to thin out, Sarah found herself standing alone on the terrace of the museum, looking up at the spire that pierced the night sky. The door opened behind her. It was the general. He was holding 2 glasses of champagne. "Hiding from the paparazzi, Commander?" he teased, handing her a glass. "Just catching my breath, General," she smiled. "Please call me Tom. I'm retired now," he said, leaning against the railing. "You know, Sarah, I've been thinking about what you lost that night. You lost your home, your job, your reputation." "I gained more than I lost," Sarah said instantly. "I have a purpose here, Tom. Real purpose." "I know," Garrison said, "but I'm a Marine. We pay our debts." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. "What is this?" Sarah asked. "Restitution," Garrison said. "When we seized Sterling's assets, the court ruled that his victims were entitled to damages. Since you were the primary victim of his wrongful termination suit, this is your share of the settlement." Sarah opened the envelope. It was a check. The number was staggering, enough to buy a house, pay off her student loans, and never worry about rent again. "Tom, I can't take this," she gasped. "You can and you will," he said firmly. "It's not charity. It's back pay with interest. Use it. Buy a house, take a vacation, or just put it in the bank and sleep soundly, knowing that the man who tried to ruin you is now paying for your retirement." Sarah looked at the check, then at the medal on her chest, and finally at the old warrior standing beside her. "I think I'll use it to start a scholarship," she said thoughtfully. "For nursing students, specifically for those who want to work in trauma." Garrison smiled, shaking his head in amazement. "Of course you will. You never stop giving, do you?" "It's the job," Sarah said, raising her glass. "We hold the line." Garrison clinked his glass against hers. "To holding the line," he said, "and to the commander." They drank in the cool night air, the bond between them forged in the fire of a crisis, unbreakable and eternal. Sarah Jenkins had saved a life, but in doing so, she had saved herself. She had proven that even in the face of overwhelming power, the truth, and a stubborn nurse with a good heart, is the most dangerous force on earth. Sarah's story is a powerful reminder that true authority doesn't come from a title, a white coat, or a corner office. It comes from the integrity to do what is right, even when it costs you everything. In a world that often prioritizes profits over people, Sarah Jenkins proved that a single act of compassion can bring down an empire of corruption. She lost a job that didn't deserve her, but she gained a family that would defend her to the end. The hospital administrators saw a homeless man and saw a problem. Sarah saw a human being and saw a purpose. In the end, the waste of space became her greatest ally, and the nurse who was fired became a legend. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. It helps us share more stories of real-world heroes. Do you think Sarah did the right thing by defying the doctor? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one. And if you believe that nurses and veterans deserve our utmost respect, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Share this video with a nurse or a soldier in your life to show them you care. Thanks for watching. And remember, being a hero starts with just one choice.